translate her English into English.
Clapping. And Sebastian and Ingo are journalists and editors of netzpolitik.org. Please give them a warm round of applause and enjoy the talk.
Welcome to the translation of the talk, the Xandr file, a deep gaze into the abyss of the data industry. Welcome, everyone. Just so that you don't mix us up, both of us are working and journalists for netzpolitik.org who are reporting on a lot of information, just generally about the internet and what's happening there. So let's start where our research started, with this Excel file, 24.4 megabytes. 650,000 lines. I had no idea I would get so into and so excited into an Excel file such as this one. I'll show you one row of this file, just to give you an idea. This is what it looks like. In the beginning, you'll have the provider. This is a data broker. And then you'll see a few numbers, a shortage, which is a country code. And then at the end is the most exciting thing, the segment. In this example, Sexy Center is sex shop. Those are target groups. And with the segments, you can target specific groups with your advertisement. And this document comes from a company that the least of you might have heard of, but most of you have actually had interactions with Xandr, which is an advertising analytics division of the Warner Media. So this file, there's two storylines around this file. One of them is from the Verbraucherzentrale Bundesverband, which is the consumer association, and they basically say this is the Snowden moment for the online ad industry. And then there's another discourse storyline, comes from a private company, maybe you've heard of it, Microsoft. Well, this file is rather outdated, and we accidentally, inadvertently published it and took it offline immediately. Fortunately, one person realized that this is online, Wolfi Christel. It's a tracking researcher from Vienna. Thank you very much. Big shout out one more time for Wolfi Christel, who was the person who discovered this file on the internet. All right, before we go into this file a little bit more in depth, let's take a step back. Let's zoom out a little. What are we going to be talking about today? When we talk about EdTech and targeting advertisement, so what's that industry that we're talking about, the EdTech industry? For me, it was really, really helpful to kind of understand what type of system is this, how powerful is this system? Is this an invisible power? We see it everywhere, online advertisement. I'm assuming that all of you have ad blockers in place in your browsers while surfing, but on your apps, on your smartphone, on the smart television, you can basically not escape this type of advertisement. $650 billion industry, if we look at 2023. And this is influencing how we perceive world. A lot of stuff that we see online is also advertisement. It is a driver for technical development. It's important for what type of standards do we have, what type of systems are being developed, and what type of social systems are being affected by this. So when we think about it, why are news headlines the way that they're done today? Why social networks are being designed the way they are? A lot of it tracks back and traces back to EdTech and EdTech as a business industry, and that it has to work. It is a super important way of financing media today, especially social media, but also other kinds of media, not just social one. So let's have a bit of a look at how does this technically work, this advertising system. We're not going to look at the big players. We're not going to look at Google and Facebook's. They're closed advertising systems. We are going to look at what Wolfi Christel distributed surveillance advertising system. So this starts with the users, right? So we're trying to simplify this so that you get a bit of an understanding of this real-time bidding. So we start with the user that access a website, uses the television, uses a digital payment system, and these data points are being handed over to data brokers, including IDs. They're super important. Cookie IDs, super essential in mobile advertising IDs, all sorts of like IDs, like telephone numbers, sort of things. Those data brokers do what Sebastian has already described. They segment this data. So they create containers that have the same trades, so their IDs. So let's take this example of goodquestion.net. It's kind of like ask.com in German. So goodquestions.net, if you visit and you ask a question, let's say you look up something on how to lose weight, and this piece of information that you researched that with your ID lands in the data broker system and then creates a segment for the people who are interested in how to lose weight. So they create a contract with so you have these like ad clients that then go in contact with the data brokers, and they kind of agree upon what type of target groups they want to target. So they then set up where they want to, which segment they want to put their placements of advertisement in. And then you obviously have the other side, like how do we create advertisement based out of this? So we have this person that goes and surfs a website, and there is advertisement on the website, and this website offers advertisement, and they provide for a supply platform who is visiting with what ID. This supply platform hands over to Ad Exchange that this person is visiting my website, and then the distribution platform, there's some sort of bidding that happens within milliseconds. What type of advertisement is going to be placed for this user on the website? So if we look at the file Xandr, we mainly look at the left side of this construct, right? So like how do we create these segmentations and all that type of stuff. So that was a simplification of this process, and now we're going to go head into the more complicated. No, this was a joke. We're going to try to simplify it even more. So how do we create this? How do we have this? So we have this split of the data industry, and we have this kind of dual discourse. So oftentimes you hear this narrative of there's no personal data, there's nothing sensitive about this. Everything of these segments are very like coarse, they're very rough, they're very large groups of people. Keep moving, nothing to really see here. Like there's really nothing that could be of care for us as a feeling of infringing on our personal rights. So, and then we have on the other side, we have this narrative that's B2B, so that you can have personalized advertisement with lots of databases, you have very precise target groups, and you can activate clients as you would like and want to go, and they're very, very fitted to the person that's serving. So is this an ambivalence, or are they trying to sell something impossible? You can make up your own mind based on what we've discovered, and we'll provide you with what we've found on our research, as well in the file that we mentioned earlier, but also in our research for this article, we talked to a lot of people. One particular that was part of a sales deal for one of those data brokers. So we have a pretty good understanding of what type of resources are being fed into what type of advertisements is being shown. Potentially smart TVs are a big market, for example, and this bonus programs are part of this. All sorts of information that you can utilize. Any sort of data that you leave with companies, ultimately, like credit card companies. We've discovered segments like that were linking back to a resource, or like as their source as MasterCard purchases. There is a beautiful quote from this sales talk. Well, if one person calls you, like from a market research institute, that would like to ask you if you like to play golf, that piece of information could also land in this advertising system. So there's a bunch of different players and companies that exchange and trade these pieces and nuggets of information that is being found. Lots of resources are obviously apps and websites, things such as weather apps, to be honest. Weather apps constantly send over geodata of the advertised target group. So what categories are being generated based off of this? So we have about 650,000 categories, which are a bit difficult to analyze because sometimes they're being named different, even though they ultimately cluster the same thing. So we've kind of tried to create a bit of a meta view and cluster these segments a little bit. Just wanted to give you an idea of what segments are there. Cars is one of the most favored categories. So who owns a Mercedes? Who owns 2 cars? Who has a leasing contract that ends in 6 months? Personal information such as conservative retiree or divorced people. There is a segment for different jobs. So are you working for a larger or a small company? But also something that are more granular, like judges, journalists, those type of categories you'll find. There's some very, very small detailed descriptions ultimately of what type of segments these groups are and what attitudes they have, who has an income less than 100,000, who has an income between 1 to 2,000. Quite precise, gives you an idea. It completes the picture of what. It was really, really hard finding a characteristic not within this system. So, yeah. So let's go a little bit more deep into what we actually found. So we have looked at these segments that we really couldn't get out of our minds anymore, like moms who shop like crazy. It's very telling they're called passionate lovers. It's almost endearing. But if we think about the general attitude, is like this feeling of I'm constantly overlooked, right? So we kind of have these like different words. Like there's another category called fragile seniors, maybe people who can't really defend themselves. They're being described or like as very insecure and overspending. Like who would like to belong in these type of categories? So these seem to be people that are easily scammed. We've had categories that were linked to medical things such as eating disorders or intent adoption. So people who would like to adopt children. That's quite intimate. We've also found German military. We've also found policymakers. So people who are able to make decisions and things like this.
Well, you can get lost in the data, you've noticed that, and that happened to us. We'd spent days and weeks and finding interesting things, but we wanted to get some more structure into this, and therefore we did this. We had these 650,000 segments, and we decided to filter out broadly to get something we could work with better. So we started filtering by EU country codes. We knew that we would be sorting out a lot of interesting things that way, but we wanted to have hard findings. And then we ended up with about 44,000 segments, still too much to overlook, to read through them all. About 3,000 of those were from Germany. So we filtered again using keywords, and we chose keywords where we hoped that the resulting segments would be personally overbearing, overreaching, perhaps. So we used all these spicy words. You can read up on them all. And through those segments, we then went manually to make sure that we hadn't made any mistakes and actually found a non-meaningful segment. And we ended up with about 1,900 really worrying segments from 15 EU countries. And these we found really concerning. And they belong to these top categories: religion, children, personal weaknesses, health, political views, and financial capability, financial capacity, which is, of course, very interesting for advertisers to know who earns how much. We mapped this onto a Europe map, You can look at this here. For example, we have the European map for financial capacity. The darker the country, the more segments we found for that country. And in the pop-up, you can see that Germany has quite frank segmentation, low earners without orientation being one of them. And all that you can read up on GitHub. And thanks to data journalist Johannes Gehle, without whom this part of the research would not have been possible. He is not here tonight, but today, but thanks to him. So that means we have black on white, we have what you kind of knew beforehand if you are around on the internet, and if you inspect cookie banners, then you do know that the data ends up somewhere, but you can actually now see the risks and the side effects, and we have all these categories sorted, that you're being sorted into 650,000 of them, and that gets you into some kind of shape. And with that, of course, there are risks and side effects. And we collected a few quotes by people that we talked to as part of our research. I don't want to read them all out, but just to show you, one of them, of course, is the loss of informational self-control. How are you ever supposed to understand where your data ends up and follow this? And you cannot grasp where your data ends up this way, because at least with the second step of the company that is mentioned in the privacy statement, they might be handing the data on somewhere else entirely, and you simply don't know. So this can get abused, and this is all about making people do certain things, manipulating them into action. And it's not just about who of you has visited which website, who is interested in horses and who's interested in baking. These are super detailed pieces of information about health, personal features, personal weaknesses, and it's well proven that gaming addicts are a frequent target here. So who spends the most amounts in a casino, for example? And of course, this is all about using your weaknesses. And with that, there comes a risk of discrimination as well. Through online advertising, people cannot just be sorted into a category, they can also be excluded from an offering. Just imagine job adverts that might not be shown to older people, perhaps, or that are not shown to people whose browser language is Arabic. And we are talking about a risk of political manipulation here as well. If we know that people are classified in such a detailed way, they can be manipulated more easily too. And that isn't all. Still, regarding risks and side effects, the issue of security and geopolitics becomes more and more important given the current state of the world. And people have pointed to the issue that both IT security and national security could be affected. IT security, the Israel paper Haaretz has proven that this system of distributed data that is very hard to overlook or impossible to overlook is a super honeypot for security companies and secret services that want to use the information that is contained. And according to the Haaretz research, they are using these systems to plant state Trojans, spyware, on people's devices. And, of course, there's a national security implication as well. If you imagine soldiers being targeted, judges being targeted, or police people, politicians. So you would then think, well, it's just US companies that do this. That has long been the perspective. And from this far, we can easily understand that some European companies, and in particular German companies, are involved in this network and deeply interwoven with it. The Elsewhere company in Berlin, for example, has more than 15,000 segments, and that includes multicultural families, families in difficulty, age 13 to 18, place visits, vending machines, Berliner Bank, so a certain bank in Berlin. The Akte company, who through various sublevels owns German TV stations Pro7 and Sat1, they have categories such as sleep disorder, menopause, churches and religious groups, first and second management level. Then eMetric, a subsidiary of Deutsche Telekom in Hamburg. They have companies Interest Erotic. Then we have Zeotap from Berlin, Spain, LGBT being one of their categories. We found more data brokers from Germany, the UK, France, Italy, Spain, the Netherlands, Denmark, Switzerland. US is the largest player, but other companies do want to have a share of the cake from different countries. And so this is closer to home. We had the particular privilege to compare answers. We wrote to many of these companies, and the responses seemed quite similar. We asked them about these segments that we found with their names, and we could watch what came back. An interesting interesting spread of responses. Some didn't respond at all. Some took a long time, several weeks, and writing us that this was basically an outdated file. And then there was this PR strategy, compassion. For us as individuals, it's very hard to read these kinds of accusations. For me as an individual, it was interesting to find how emotional these responses were. Another strategy was the embrace. We appreciate the work of data journalists like yourself a lot. And then they were offering interviews with their CEO and offering photos of that CEO. And the third strategy was talking down. Our segment data is not, for example, based on health data, but only on surf behavior, which indicates a general interest on certain topics. So here again, we have the kind of split of the data industry. So maybe not everyone interested in eating disorders actually has an eating disorder. It might be the sister. Yes, that much is clear. But if you want to, you're not going to earn money if that is just the kind of people that you get. And what we never really received as a response is an explanation about the fact how these segments are made up. We asked several people, and we never received answers on that. The only thing that they said, this is outdated, we're not using this anymore. So, what is in the data, we asked, and what does this look like in detail? We never had a response on that. So, what is it like? Can this actually be legal? There is a statement, a fantastic statement by the Berlin Data Privacy Office Commissioner, Meike Kamp. She said, the effects of individual decisions on oneself are often impossible to assess. So if you click on accept at a cookie banner, for example, you read about data partners. She goes on, a truly self-determined and informed consent becomes practically impossible according to the GDPR. The GDPR demands this. It's practically impossible. We could talk a lot about these privacy aspects of the data industry, the ad industry, but nothing can express it better than the following example. Of course, the data protection authorities do say that only informed consent is permitted as a foundation. So everyone tries to reach that kind of informed consent. It has to be informed, it has to be voluntary, and the bizarre ways in which they try to achieve this is illustrated by Wetter Online, one of the popular weather websites. An important source that's always been mentioned as a source for the segmentation. So we looked at their privacy statement and found, oh, someone has changed there. Now we see a list of individual companies with which data is shared. And this is a quite long list. goes into 4 digits. Who doesn't know these companies? Of course, we know where they hand the data to. Transparency, who is supposed to understand this? So the data brokers themselves say our partners are responsible to get the informed consent. This is not our job. And the data protection authorities do not have the full picture because they will only get involved if people raise a complaint. And how are you supposed to complain about a company that you don't know about and that you don't know that they have your data? And one thing we do not want to do, and that is to incite depression and inactivity, because there are things that you can do to proactively and actively respond. We're not going to go into this in detail, but I'm going to state it. The first is the issue of protecting your own data. You can do some small things. Use ad blockers. Many of you, then you can reset your MAID, something exclusive. I didn't know this, but the MAID is the mobile advertising ID, an individual number that identifies me on my mobile. I can reset that. There are settings for that. Where to find those, I'll tell you later. The second approach is to annoy the data brokers, or to put it less polemically, ask for your data. We all have the right, according to Article 15 of the GDPR. You can ask them what data they hold about you. And not many people do this. And of course, because most data brokers are completely unknown, you don't have the email addresses to send to, but, well, fantastic. We at netzpolitik.org have written down the details. You can find them. In this article, you have the information about resetting the mobile advertising ID too. And then the third approach, of course, you can support the privacy authorities, the data protection authorities, by raising complaints. So in Germany, you go to the authority at your federal state, and they only normally get active if someone raises a complaint. So this is not going to be just filling some drawer there. Maybe that can actually kick off something. Also, getting active means expanding on the research. We only were able to shine a flashlight on this, but there are things that we haven't been able to observe. There were countries that we weren't able to look at. So to enable this with a quite low threshold, we published everything or documented everything we did on GitHub. And fortunately, some people have used this already. The markup in the US has done this. They've received the same data. They were in exchange with us. Then we had the Australian Guardian, and we had papers in the Netherlands and Switzerland. And there are still things to discover. We haven't done all countries yet. Surely not all the absurd categories have been found, even if we spent hours on them. We have all of 650,000, so there's much more to find. So to close, of course, Congress is a political event. We at netzpolitik.org are a political medium, so it's important for us to say that the one thing is what we can do ourselves, where we can get active ourselves. But the other thing is individual approaches for getting active again, yeah. But this is a problem that we will not solve by one individual or some individuals asking for their information or raising complaints. That is something that can be a prick of the needle, perhaps, that can hurt slightly and yield some information. Transparency is important. Controls by the authorities is important. And that will happen due to our research. Several privacy commissioners, data protection commissioners, have told us that they will get active and put the data brokers into their sites. And we will ask back every 6 months how things have progressed and see what has come of it. So that's all good and important, but we also need a collective solution. We won't be able to change everyone's behavior. We have to find political solutions, and we have reached the stage where we say it can only work through this system that is so broken through and through. It cannot be that people's data is being sent around the internet and people are sorted into categories in the background and weaknesses are being abused. The system is so broken from the inside that it has to be abolished. Targeted advertising has to go.
because the risks are simply too big. They're too large. And maybe as a last and final point, alternative solutions to targeted advertisement does not need to mean no advertisement. I think it's important to say that. I'm all down for advertisement, and a lot of media do need ad income. Like the alternative to targeted ad, to the super invasive observation type of advertisement. I think what's we're kind of aiming for is contextualized advertisement, so that you'll place advertisement that thematically fit with the content of journalistic articles. So let's say we have an article about football, like there's going to be something that's related to the field that the article is about. So there's first experiments around them. There is alternatives that are like context advertisement. If you want to know more, please go and surf to netzpolitik.org. You can find the whole research that they did online. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you also very much for streaming in and listening in. We're obviously still going to translate the Q&A that's coming up. But so far, your translations were done by Sebales and Simply CM. All right, thank you very much. This was frightening, but great. For the questions, please create queues behind the microphones in the hall. There's 4 microphones. For the collective solution, we need information and discourse, and this article and your research was obviously one. Also, there is the elections for the European Parliament next year, so remember that and keep it in mind. All right. So, microphone 4, we have the first question. Thank you very much. My first thought when you showed this large files was that, is there something like a technical solution for finding out what, so it's self-disclosure, so can I do some sort of reverse engineering, like can I give someone my ID and then I can find out what different data brokerages have? Yes, that exists. All information are in the article that we published. There is tools, there's technical tools. With the help of the GDPR, you can make information inquiries. There is no real simple technical solution, but please, I'm excitedly looking forward to when it is being built. But we've created the data basis for building a tool such as this one. Is there a question from the internet? No question? Okay. Then microphone number
4.
Cool research, thank you. Have you heard about any intentions to use machine learning language models on this and get this to the next level, perhaps? Not something I've seen, but it's not implausible. Data brokers do say, though, that their data sets are not stored indefinitely. They have deletion deadlines, but that will be enough to have the data in the first place. AI, machine learning, not something I've heard. I haven't, but don't give them ideas. But one thought at least, another data broker told us a very different story and explained to us why it was all harmless. They said that people are using word clouds on the internet, and these word clouds on the internet would be used. So I see a website on Ferraris, and then I land in this segment. And working with word clouds, that is quite close to working with large language models. But, well, maybe we shouldn't give anyone ideas. If I think about this, there's a lot of automatization that is surely already happening regarding the assignment to segments. We technically don't know, though.
And we have another question. Yes, thank you very much for this talk. What sort of irritates me slightly is that you publish things on github.com, because that's a Microsoft-run platform, and they say that the data that you found isn't current, but if you publish it on GitHub, you obviously give them current data. So, I mean, Microsoft received the Big Brother award this year for lifetime achievement, and I obviously find it a bit conflicting, and you don't really abide by the rules yourselves. Yes, life is full of contradictions. We sort of have to bear them. That is obviously the irony of the internet, that we publish on a Microsoft-owned platform. That's partially why it intrigues me and I find it attractive. I believe that there isn't a wrong or right in this situation. We have 5 minutes for the questions, but we have no more questions behind the microphones. Oh no, there is a question from the internet.
It's maybe a bit of the topic. There was the question, how much donation Netzpolitik.org still needs for the next year and how to do that.
Thank you for the question. Do you know the current state of things? I think the last time I looked, it was about 214,000 euro, and I think by the 27th of December, that gives us 4 more days. The donation campaign.
Is there some sort of social algorithm to close the gap? So let's say I have 2 data points. If I have another data attribute, can I trace that back to a person? Is there any information on that? Do you mean to complete the profiles? I can't really tell you technically, but there is companies that pure and only job is to do ID matching and cookie syncing. So that's what their focus is. They focus in basically combine the different data that are distributed, that are out there, that are decentralized. So even if you switch to a different browser or you switch to a different email address, there's and then mobile ad IDs. Even if you delete that regularly, you should assume that the industry has ways to connect them and place things back together. And this reminds me of an aspect that I was hoping to be talking to in the question and answer section. It's super transparent, and it's multi-layered game of where is the ball underneath the hats. So you have the rules, obviously, in which you have to delete data after a certain amount of time, but there's a constant new stream of incoming data, and the data brokers sell and resell, and they switch the hats that they have. So while we were doing the research, one company was bought and purchased, changed their names. Xandr itself does not exist anymore based on the name, has been bought by Microsoft. It's really, really difficult to kind of weave through that in transparency of the system.
I would like to know whether you analyzed how many IDs or users are behind these various segments, and whether there were any surprises, segments that had a very large number of IDs, and how the distribution was. A very good question. That information sadly is missing from that file. In the file that we had, we know that segments include thousands or tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of IDs in some cases, but individual segments we cannot say. I've heard a minimum number in my research. A data broker told us that they wanted to calm us this way. They said this is not very granular. The smallest would be 15 households. Okay, if that is enough to find a target by individual visits, I would actually find that scary.
Another question from the internet.
Do you know if there are any sorry, ich sollte auf Englisch reden. Die Frage war sollte Deutsch reden. Die Frage war auf Englisch.
Sorry, he was just apologizing for speaking English. Are there any tools to automatize GDPR inquiries, such as Ask the State, but simply for GDPR inquiries? Yes, there is Auskunftsfragen.de. It's a German platform to automatize these type of GDPR inquiries. Yes.
We have 2 minutes and 2 questions. Okay, you presented it in a way as if the abolition of personalized advertising was the actual fix to this problem. And I keep thinking about this. Maybe you have done this too. Maybe I think a prohibition on trading of personal data might be the better way. In an analogy to drugs or child pornography, maybe that industry would be then drained of the way in which they could work. The large companies with their huge advertising budgets would then not be allowed to use personalized data anymore, and they would not be able to buy this. Wouldn't that be a solution? And microphone 3 will collect questions. You've given us a few addresses for an opt-out. Question then is, what do I have to give them? What do they claim to need to actually enforce this kind of opt-out? And the responses, please. Well, the first question first, perhaps in that scenario you would still have the large platforms that collect data themselves that do not have to sell or buy any data, Google, Facebook and such. So the problem would not be diminished that much. And that is the direction in which we are going. For example, tracking cookies no longer being allowed by browser operators. They are working on excluding all these smaller third-party players, leaving only the large players still. Maybe easier to control if the trading is no longer possible. The German telecom communication companies want to have their own ID scheme so that they can start their own tracking. So if you take out the trading, you've solved part of the problem, but not the whole problem by far. And the second question, I need another keyword, a reminder for that second question. What data they want to have in order to process an opt-out. That is the next problem. Sometimes they want the cookie ID, and finding that is very, very advanced or even impossible. Mobile advertising ID, that is one important thing. And maybe you can supply email address and phone number. Please always say, only use this for the purpose of this request. You have to do this, sadly. Yeah, but the mobile advertising ID, and if you can get to it, the cookie ID. And of course, we wrote into the article that we are interested in your experience to find whether it's being made difficult or easy for you. Thank you. We have run out of time. Thank you. And thanks for listening to our interpretation again.